The millionaire's daughter never walked, until a nanny revealed the secret no doctor could. Before we begin, take a moment to comment. Your city, where are you watching from today? And once the story is over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. High above the city, in a glass-walled penthouse, where the morning light spilled across cold marble floors, something impossible had just happened. Sophie, a 4-year-old girl who had not smiled or taken a single step since losing her mother, suddenly burst into laughter in the arms of her nanny Elena. Ethan, the distant and unshakable CEO, froze in disbelief. His eyes widened, the mask of control slipping for the first time. Elena herself was stunned, caught between surprise and tenderness, while little Sophie clutched her teddy bear tightly, her gaze shining with life for the first time in months. What had just stirred inside this child, something no doctor had been able to unlock. The penthouse opened like another world's ceilings. Soared glass walls framed a mist-draped central park, and the chill of morning light reflected off white stone, making the place feel more like a museum than a home. The private elevator doors slid open with a hush. Elena stepped inside, clutching a worn canvas bag to her chest. Her old coat did little to hide the trembling in her hands, yet in her dark eyes burned a steady light, a resolve she refused to surrender. This was not a dream. This was the only path to medicine for her mother, to books for her younger brother. Across the marble floor, Ethan Blake appeared the embodiment of power. His suit immaculate, his tie razor sharp, every gesture precise. His eyes were so cold they seemed to freeze the very air around him. A brief nod, no more than a social courtesy, passed for his greeting. Elena lowered her gaze, not out of fear, but to steady the quiver in her chest. She understood too well this man did not need a nanny. He needed a shadow to fill a void he refused to face. Only one person softened the air between them, Grace Blake. With a gentle smile and eyes that carried both light and worry, she laid a reassuring hand on Elena's shoulder, like a mother comforting a daughter. "Don't be nervous, my dear. You'll be just fine." In that fragile moment, Elena tightened her grip on the bag strap and drew a long, steady breath. Her footsteps echoed lightly across the marble, like knocks on the door of destiny. What she did not yet know was that this meeting would change not only her life, but also shatter the frozen world behind a man's guarded eyes. Chapter 1. The Cold Door. The penthouse hallway stretched long and silent, like a corridor leading into a fortress. Modern paintings lined the walls in precise symmetry, while white light spilled down onto polished wood, so gleaming it mirrored every step. Elena followed behind Grace, her worn shoes clicking softly, the humble sound swallowed by the suffocating luxury all around. At the end of the hall, a massive wooden door eased open. Ethan Blake appeared tall, immovable, like a wall come to life. He didn't just stand there, he blocked the way, as if this home were a kingdom, and he its king, deciding who might cross its threshold. His white shirt fit neatly, sleeves rolled with precision, every detail of his appearance radiating control. But it was his eyes that made Elena hesitate, cold sharp, laced with a contempt he hardly bothered to hide. Without thinking, Elena stepped back, her fingers tightening on the strap of her canvas bag. In that instant, she felt she was facing more than a man, She was facing an invisible wall, dividing wealth from poverty, those who had choices from those who had only one. Grace's voice, gentle as a stream, broke the silence. "Ethan, this is Elena. She'll be helping with Sophie." Ethan said nothing. His gaze swept over Elena from head to toe, lingering a shade too long on her worn coat and scuffed shoes. Elena felt the prick of every silent judgment like needles against her pride. Yet instead of lowering her head, she drew in a breath, straightened her shoulders. Her eyes, though unsure, held steady. From the far end of the hall, a flicker of movement. A small figure lingered quietly, half hidden by the doorframe. Sophie. The little girl clutched a frayed teddy bear, her wide gray eyes, watching without a word, without expression. Elena's heart tightened at the sight. 4 years old. Yet her gaze carried the silence and weariness of someone far older. Ethan noticed his daughter watching. His brow tightened almost in annoyance, as if her brief step out of silence was a disruption. He shifted aside, part invitation, part dismissal. His voice was flat heavy. "You may enter, but don't expect to stay long." Elena crossed the threshold slowly, her heartbeat pounding. She knew she wasn't just stepping into a penthouse. She was walking into an invisible battle. On one side, the father's cold contempt. On the other, the hollow but yearning eyes of his child. And in between stood her armed with nothing but the stubborn belief that kindness could soften even the hardest of rooms. The door closed behind her with a deep echo, as if sealing off her old life. She could not know then that destiny had already begun writing a new page for the three souls bound together by wounds no one believed could heal. The living room unfolded before her like a parallel world. A Persian rug stretched wide, Italian leather sofas gleamed, and shelves of architectural books stood in flawless order. Everything so perfectly arranged that Elena feared even her touch would leave a mark. In the reflection of the giant glass window, she caught sight of herself, a girl in a faded coat clutching a shabby bag, an image jarringly out of place. Her hand rose as if to smooth the fabric to hide her plainness. But then it stopped. If she hid that, what would be left? This was who she was, a poor girl, carrying heavy burdens, yet still standing tall before the trial. Ethan entered after her, moving as though the very stones belonged to him. He poured a glass of water, set it down with care, and folded his arms. His cold gaze landed on Elena like an unspoken test. No polite greeting, no gesture of welcome. Only the unyielding question in his eyes. "Do you really think you belong here?" Grace broke the silence, her voice calm. Elena once studied nursing. She knows how to care for children. She's more than just a nanny, Ethan. A faint smirk curved Ethan's lips, colder than ice. A nurse who dropped out is no different from a housemaid. I've hired 3 already. Every one of them failed. I don't need another dreamer. The words sliced deep, sharp as a blade. Elena bit her lip, her eyes glistening, but no tears fell. In that moment, she thought of her mother's frail hands, her younger brother's face when given a new book. That was why she was here. To endure. To stand. Silence pressed heavy in the room. And then from the doorway, Sophie. She still hugged her teddy bear, her bare feet, stepping softly on the rug. Her eyes fixed on Elena. No words, no smile. Yet something gentler flickered in her gaze, as if she had glimpsed something different. Elena's lips curved into a trembling but sincere smile. Not a word was spoken. Yet Sophie's eyes shifted like an invisible thread had just been tied between two hearts. Elena knew in that instant she wasn't only facing a hard man. She was standing before a child who needed more than anything a hand willing to touch her pain. Ethan caught the look. His brow furrowed, and he moved quickly, shutting the door as though to shield his daughter from the stranger's eyes. His voice came low-clipped. "Your job is to watch her. Don't think you can change anything in this house." Elena lowered her gaze, but inside a quiet flame rose. She didn't need to change the house. She only needed to reach one small, forgotten heart. Sensing the air tighten, Grace stepped closer, laying a gentle hand on her son's arm, a silent reminder that harshness is not always strength. Ethan recoiled faintly, but his mother's eyes cracked his armor for the briefest moment. "Elena will stay," Grace said firmly, her tone warm yet unwavering. "At least give Sophie a chance. The child has lost too much already." Ethan turned away, his eyes fixed on the distant skyline through the glass. His shoulders were stiff, but his fingers curled into a fist. His silence was an answer. He would allow it, but without trust. Elena stood motionless, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Part of her longed to run back to her cramped but safe apartment. But Sophie's gaze held her fast, silent, wordless, binding them with a fragile thread. The little girl lingered at the doorway, half hidden, half revealed, her teddy clutched tightly. Elena lowered herself to the child's level. No greetings, no questions, just a soft nod, a gentle smile. And something unusual happened. Sophie did not retreat. She lingered for a few seconds longer, then slowly pulled the door shut. No sound, only the emptiness it left behind. Yet to Elena, it wasn't rejection. It was a silent invitation, a door opening into Sophie's world. Ethan exhaled his voice, cold, though less cutting than before. "Your room is at the end of the hall. You'll start tomorrow morning. And remember, do only what you're here to do." He turned, leaving behind the faint scent of coffee and oak. Elena closed her eyes briefly, gripping the strap of her bag. Inside her rose a vow. "Even if he doesn't believe in me, I won't give up. Because that child deserves a tomorrow." Grace's smile was soft, her eyes glowing with quiet faith. She knew she had been right to bring Elena here. The hall fell silent once more, the only sound the echo of Elena's footsteps. And within that cold silence, a small seed of hope had been planted. Chapter 2. The Silent Mirror. The nursery door swung open, and Elena nearly froze. This was no child's room. It was an entire kingdom, gilded in gold. Towering shelves overflowed with toys. Princess dolls shimmered in satin gowns. Giant teddy bears sat guard in every corner, and ornate music boxes sang classical melodies. The ceiling was painted sky blue, dotted with glowing artificial stars. A childhood dream purchased with limitless checks. Yet in the very center of all that splendor, Sophie sat curled in the corner of the rug, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. The glitter and grandeur around her might as well not exist. Her gray eyes stared blankly out the window toward the towers in the distance that swallowed the sky. She was so still that for a fleeting second, Elena thought the child was part of the decor, another silent ornament in this lonely palace. Elena stepped inside her shoes, sinking into the thick carpet. She made sure her footsteps were audible, hoping Sophie might turn, might notice her. But the little girl didn't move. Not a flicker. Elena knelt down, lowering herself to eye level. The distance was only a few steps, yet it felt as though a glass wall stood between them, impenetrable. Her chest ached. Sophie's vacant gaze called up memories of her own mother in the depths of depression. Eyes hollow, life's light extinguished. She laid her hand gently on the rug, letting the threads slide between her fingers. Not to reach Sophie, but to remind herself she was present, that she was truly here before a small soul screaming in silence. From her bag, Elena pulled a worn comic book, its spine frayed. Setting it softly on the carpet, she whispered, voice warm and trembling, "I brought a story for you. Would you like to hear it?" No reply. Sophie's eyes stayed fixed on the sky outside, arms tightening around her bear. But Elena did not give up. She opened the first page and began to read quietly, sometimes switching her voice to match the characters, adding a playful lilt. The words rose in the wide, echoing room, filling the luxurious but lifeless air. Golden light from the sunset spilled through the glass, brushing Sophie's pale cheeks. Elena paused. She noticed the girl's lips pressed together, subtle, almost hidden, as if holding back something from within. Not a smile, not tears, just the faintest crack in the glass of silence. Elena's heart trembled. She barely dared breathe, afraid to shatter the fragile moment. And then Ethan's voice. He stood at the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. His tone was even cold. "Don't expect miracles, Miss Carter. She doesn't speak. She doesn't laugh. And she doesn't need anyone's pity." Elena lifted her gaze. Behind the contempt in his eyes, she saw fear disguised buried. Rather than argue, she turned gently back to Sophie and whispered, "That's all right. I'll just sit here and read. Whenever you're ready, you only have to look my way." Sophie remained silent. Yet in the gray haze of her eyes, Elena caught a glimmer. Small, faint, but enough. Enough to stay. Night descended. Outside, the city glittered with ribbons of light, but in the nursery, only a crescent-shaped lamp glowed softly. Elena sat cross-legged on the rug, the book closed long ago. She hadn't moved, hadn't rushed. She simply stayed so Sophie would know she was not alone. The clock ticked slowly. Up close, Elena saw every detail of Sophie's fragile face, skin, pale lashes, resting heavy, tiny hands, clinging so tightly to her teddy that the fingers were red. Each line, each gesture spoke silently of a child who no longer believed the world was safe enough to open her heart. Elena's memory slipped back to herself at that same age, the night her father died. In their damp little apartment, she too had sat by a window, frozen, listening to her mother's muffled sobs, to her brother's pencil scratching against his schoolwork, too afraid to speak. Sophie was a mirror of her past, Elena thought. And had it not been for the neighbor who brought a loaf of bread and whispered, "You'll be okay," perhaps she too would have faded into silence. A faint movement pulled her back. Sophie shifted just slightly, her gray eyes flicking toward Elena only for the briefest instant, a glance so fleeting most would miss it. But to a child locked in silence, it was an open door. Elena smiled softly, almost imperceptibly, whispering, "Thank you for looking at me. That alone makes me happy." Outside footsteps echoed. Ethan again, slow and rigid. He paused, peering through the cracked door. What he saw? A woman who had sat for hours without demanding, without forcing, only waiting. For a fleeting second, his icy eyes faltered. Then, as if afraid to be caught, he turned away, closing the door behind him with a hollow thud. Elena lifted her gaze toward the shadow of that door. No anger stirred. She knew his coldness was armor built to shield wounds he had never admitted. One day it would crack. And she believed it wouldn't be a doctor or an expert who broke it open. It would be the little girl curled in this corner. She pulled a blanket over Sophie's shoulders, set the comic gently beside her, and blew out the crescent lamp. In the tender dark, she whispered a prayer only her heart could hear. Please let her dream in peace tonight. Late hours passed. The wind swept in from Central Park, carrying the hum of the distant city. The nursery lay hushed, washed only in the blurred glow of lights from far away. Elena leaned against the wall, eyes heavy with sleep, yet her thoughts never strayed from the corner where Sophie lay with her teddy bear. A soft rustle startled her awake. Sophie stirred. She didn't cry, didn't call out, just reached her small hand across the rug. Her fingers brushed the comic book. She pulled it close, pressing it to her chest, beside her bear. Elena's breath caught. She said nothing, dared not break the spell. Gratitude filled her eyes. Such a tiny act, so simple, it could have gone unnoticed. But to Elena, it was the first signal. Sophie had not rejected her. Sophie had accepted. Tears welled, but Elena wiped them quickly, afraid a sob would shatter the fragile bond. In her heart, she whispered, "I've found the first crack in the wall of silence." The clock told midnight. Elena stayed until Sophie's breathing softened into sleep. Quietly, she rose, slipped from the room, and pulled the door to a gentle close. Her heart, though, opened wider than ever. And in the quiet darkness, a small seed of hope was planted. From tomorrow onward, every glance, every gesture might become the thread that could lead Sophie back from silence. Chapter 3. The First Laugh. Rain hammered the playroom's broad glass windows. Droplets burst and slid down the cold pane, mirroring New York's leaden sky. The spacious room overflowed with expensive toys, yet it felt as hushed as an empty museum. Elena sat on the rug at the center. Across from her, Sophie curled into a corner. Gray eyes far away, arms wrapped around a threadbare teddy. The drumming rain only deepened the heaviness in the air, a curtain between two worlds, one wealthy but wordless, the other poor but aching for connection. Elena drew a steady breath. From her familiar canvas bag, she pulled out a worn hand puppet shaped like a dinosaur. It wasn't as grand as anything on the shelves, but it held something else: warmth from hands that had once held it with hope and love. She slipped it on, dropped her voice, and boomed, "Hello, I'm Mr. Dinosaur. Anyone who sits too quietly will make me sneeze." She flung herself back with an exaggerated gasp. "Ha, ha, ha-choo." She toppled onto the rug, arms and legs flailing like an upside-down beetle. Her hair tumbled loose. The dinosaur bobbed and wobbled. Silence clung to the room, then a tiny sound. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth, her small shoulders quivered. The gray in her eyes caught a spark, and then a soft, unmistakable giggle slipped out, as fragile as a raindrop, and just as real. Elena shot upright, heart stuttering. Her eyes widened, and a bright, careful smile bloomed. She didn't speak, didn't rush. She kept the bit going, even sillier now, determined to coax that sound again. "Oh no, I sneezed too hard. I think someone needs to tickle my belly so my nose stops itching." The dinosaur declared, Elena's voice shamelessly goofy. Sophie laughed louder, pure and ringing, rolling onto the carpet until her teddy nearly tumbled from her arms. That laughter, absent from this penthouse for more than a year, rose like bells, the laughter of a child buried in silence. Elena tightened her hold on the puppet. Tears glazed her eyes, not sorrow, but the kind that comes with small miracles. Dear God, she thought she's come back. If only for this moment. Out in the hall, Ethan stood frozen at the cracked door. He'd heard. He stared, as if doubting his own ears. The sound he'd longed for since the day his wife died. Sophie's laughter had returned, not because of him, not because of any renowned doctor, but because of a stranger with a shabby bag. His hand trembled against the frame. In his chest, something long locked, twisted awake joy tangled with guilt. He didn't enter. Quietly, he eased the door closed and leaned against the wall, eyes shut. For the first time in months, he felt he might cry. The rain kept time on the glass, drumming along to Elena's small play. She carried on inviting Sophie in. Mr. Dinosaur is about to topple again. Elena staggered the puppet swaying, then fell with a theatrical thud. She squealed as if truly bruised, then went still. Sophie's eyes went wide. She tilted her head, waiting. When Elena's finger twitched and the puppet rose in slow motion, Sophie burst out laughing once more, clear, bright laughter that slit the gloom wrapped around this home. This time, she didn't hide it. Her gray eyes shone, cheeks flushed. The teddy slipped to the rug as if she'd forgotten her old shield. Elena picked up the bear and placed it gently in Sophie's lap, speaking in her own quiet voice. You know, I'd rather hear your laughter than any music in the world. The simple words, plain unscripted, stilled Sophie. She hugged her bear, studying Elena, with a wary, wondering look, as if to ask, really, my laughter matters. Elena didn't ask for an answer. She set her palm softly on the carpet close, but not touching Sophie. Presence like a promise, I'll be right here when you need me. In the hallway, Ethan remained. Each peal of laughter nicked the ice he wore like armor. Relief warred with pain, relief that Sophie could laugh. Pain that it wasn't he who had brought it back. He drew away, pressing his brow to the cool wall. In the dim corridor, a rare tear fell hot as flame. Inside, Elena kept the dinosaur show alive, though her heart trembled. She knew she had witnessed something holy and small, a child thought locked in silence, laughing out loud. She looked up at the sky-blue ceiling with its glowing stars. Maybe this is only the beginning, she told herself. If laughter can return, perhaps one day those small feet will walk. The storm softened, leaving only the occasional drip along the window ledge. In the room, Sophie's laughter faded into warm, tired breaths. After months of muteness, that laughter had spent her, but it had also brought a little life back to those once emptied eyes. Elena settled near, not touching, just close enough for safety. She murmured a bit of a fairy tale, softer than the rain. Sophie's lashes lowered. Her small hand clutched the teddy. Just before sleep, she leaned barely so that her head rested nearer to Elena. An unconscious gesture, enough to make Elena's heart tremble. Elena glanced at the fine hair across Sophie's brow, and for an instant saw her own childhood, hungry for a shoulder to lean on. A single tear slipped down and vanished into the rug, while her mouth curved with a tender smile. At the doorway, Ethan had seen it all, the bright laughter, the trusting, lean Elena's quiet tear. His fingers on the frame shook. He wanted to enter to gather his child close, but fear held him back, fear of breaking the moment. In the end, he turned away and walked to his office. Architectural sketches lay unfinished on the desk, but tonight he couldn't face them. Only one sound filled his mind. His daughter's laugh, something he'd thought gone forever. Elena pulled a small blanket over Sophie and lingered a few minutes more. When she was sure the child slept, she dimmed the lights to a tender glow and moved to the door. She looked back once. Sophie lay holding her bear, the corner of her mouth still tipped up as though a trace of laughter remained. Elena closed the door softly, leaned against the hall wall, and lifted her face, drawing a long breath. Her heart felt brushed by grace, and in that breath, she knew no wall is truly permanent. Find the smallest crack, and the light will find its way in. Chapter 4. When tension breaks. Morning light pierced the wall of glass, laying gold bands across the gleaming wood floor. For the first time, after days of rain, the penthouse was flooded with sunshine. Yet instead of warmth, the light made everything uncomfortably clear. At the center of the playroom sat a blue therapy ball. Elena knelt behind it, arms gently around Sophie, while the little girl, perched upright teddy bear, clutched tight. At first, her small body trembled, but slowly, Sophie's breathing steadied. Her tiny legs shifted. Fragile muscles began relearning balance. Elena whispered softer than a breeze, "You're doing so well, Sophie. Just like sitting on the moon. There's nothing to be afraid of." Sophie lifted her gaze, still gray and hesitant, but no longer empty. Elena's heart warmed, like watching a delicate blossom unclosed to the early sun. The moment was ripped apart. The door slammed open, crashing against the wall. Ethan filled the threshold sunlight at his back, casting a long, dark shadow across the floor. His face was flushed. His eyes blazed. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" His shout drowned even the rainwater still ticking from the balcony. Elena flinched. Her hands faltered. Startled, Sophie recoiled, hugging her bear, as the ball wobbled, nearly pitching her off. Elena grabbed hold, pulse racing. It's just a small exercise," she managed, voice shaking but steadying itself. "I learned it in nursing school. It helps her feel her body again, rebuild balance." "Who do you think you are?" Ethan cut in, striding forward, thunder in each step. He planted himself in front of the ball, scooped Sophie up, and pulled her from Elena's arms. Sophie buried her face in her father's neck, trembling hard. Elena felt her heart seize, the child shivering not from the exercise, but from the anger flooding the room. "You're a nanny, hired to watch her," Ethan bit out, eyes sparking. "I've brought in the best doctors in the world. None of them could do anything. And you think, with a few cheap tricks, you're going to fix her?" Elena clenched her hands to still their shaking. Each contemptuous word cut deep, yet a resolute light held in her eyes. When she spoke, the words were tight but clear. "I'm not trying to replace anyone. I only want Sophie to have a chance, to feel alive." Ethan hesitated just a flicker as his gaze met hers, sorrowful but not weak. For an instant, he saw himself reflected there, a man clinging to the impossible. But rather than admit it, he turned away, holding his daughter tighter, as if to hide her from the world. "Don't ever do that with my child again," he said, voice low and glacial. "If I see you take another risk like that, you can pack your things and leave." He turned and strode out, Sophie still shaking in his arms. Elena stood motionless, palms tingling with the child's fading warmth. Her lips pressed together, but a tear, slid cleanly down her cheek. The morning sun now felt harsh, illuminating the helplessness on her face. Silence settled over the playroom once Ethan was gone. The therapy ball rolled slowly, coming to rest against the wall, like the echo of a hope just knocked aside. Elena remained standing, empty-handed, shoulders quivering. She sank to the rug and let the tears fall. What did I do wrong? Wasn't Sophie taking a tiny step forward? The thought bored into her mind. But then she saw again the way the girl tucked her head into her father's chest, shivering like a wounded fledgling. Sophie wasn't afraid of the practice. She was afraid of her father's anger. Down the hall, Ethan carried his daughter, the small body in his arms, tightened fingers fisting in his collar as if life depended on it. Each heavy step weighed on him, his chest cinched. He hated seeing her so frightened, yet a larger fear roared underneath the terror of losing control. He laid Sophie in her bed, drew the blanket up, and sat beside her. Looking at her tear-streaked face felt like listening to a verdict. He had failed. He hadn't saved his wife. And now he was hurting his child. Sophie, still trembling, clutched her bear and lifted reddened eyes to him. She didn't speak, but the look, pleading and reproachful all at once, pierced the ice around his heart. Ethan lowered his head. His broad shoulders shook. A sigh broke from him, like a confession to himself. In his mind, he saw Anna, his wife, laughing with their baby in the park. That laughter now cut like a blade. "You promised to protect her," Anna's voice seemed to say. His jaw locked. His hands curled into fists. He was breaking that promise day by day. In the kitchen, Elena scrubbed at her eyes and rinsed a glass with unsteady hands. Water chattered in the sink like comfort, but the sting in her chest remained. She wasn't crying for herself. She cried for the door that had just been slammed in Sophie's face, right as the child had reached out a small, open hand to meet the world. She eased into a wooden chair, chin resting in her palm, letting the kitchen's soft gold light spill across her tired features. In the quiet, she made a vow. "Even if I'm pushed away, I won't give up. Sophie deserves more than this." Night fell. Outside, the city gleamed with warm lights, but inside the penthouse, the glow seemed to go out. Each room felt like a separate world, housing its own wounded soul. In his office, Ethan sat before the wide desk laptop, open to unfinished architectural plans. He couldn't focus. His eyes fixed on the black screen, which reflected a rigid face and weighted shoulders. A glass of red wine sat untouched, dark as blood. He thought of the afternoon's laughter. Sophie's bright, breaking free after a year of silence. A sound he'd believed lost forever. Instead of peace, the memory tore at him. Joy snarled with a blind jealousy his daughter had laughed, but not because of him. His grip tightened on the glass until it nearly shattered. He knew he'd overreacted, snuffing out the small flame Elena had coaxed to life. His anger hadn't been for her. It had been for himself, for his helplessness, for losing every contest that mattered, for not being the shelter his daughter needed. A fragment of memory flashed Anna's arms around him, her murmur, "Ethan, you don't have to control everything. Just be there with me and with her." He shut his eyes and let a rare tear fall. He hadn't been there then, and now he was repeating the same wrong with Sophie. In the kitchen, Elna sat with her familiar wooden chair beneath her, and the lamp's amber halo on her tangled hair. Her eyes were still rimmed red, but steady with resolve. On the table lay the old picture book, still open, its page slightly creased, where a small hand had clutched it that afternoon. She laid her palm over it, conjuring the sound of Sophie's laughter. It was the greatest reward she'd ever known, and the keenest ache to see it cut short. She whispered, as if to herself, "Tomorrow, I'll try again, Sophie. Even if your father doesn't believe I will." Across the hall, two adults, one hunched in an office, the other silent in a kitchen, held their thoughts to the same center, a sleeping child with a teddy in her arms and cheeks still pink from laughter. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. A few stars pricked the night. And in the dark, though neither would admit it, yet both Ethan and Elena understood the storm inside them would pass, leaving space for a slender ray of light to find its way in. Chapter 5. The Apology. Soft amber light from the high pendant lamp washed the wide kitchen in a gentle, lonely glow. On the marble counter, a few glasses still held beaded drops of water. Elena stood at the sink, hands moving slowly over the dishes, heavy, deliberate. Her eyes were rimmed red dark circles, etched by too many sleepless nights. Only the hush of running water filled the room, as if trying to cover the dense silence. Elena kept herself busy. She knew if she stopped, the tears would return. The kitchen door eased open. Footsteps, heavy, unhurried. Ethan appeared. The sharp suit was gone. He wore a shirt with the sleeves pushed up, his tie loosened. His shadow stretched long in the amber light as he moved toward her. Elena heard him, but didn't turn. She knew who had come. Her heartbeat kicked, afraid, resentful, helpless, all at once. He stopped a few paces away. His broad shoulders dipped, as though something invisible pressed down on him. When he spoke, his voice was rough. He had to draw a breath to shape the words. "Elena." Her hands froze mid-scrub. Water tapped lightly from the glass. She turned, slightly, eyes wary. Ethan swallowed, then said so softly the sound seemed foreign even to him, "I'm sorry. For what I said, for what I did today. I shouldn't have shouted. I shouldn't have frightened Sophie." The kitchen went breathless. Elena looked straight at him. For the first time, she saw no cold gleam, no disdain, only exhaustion, fragility, and a grief that ran deep. "Why say it now?" she asked, voice unsteady. "Do you know Sophie took a step forward? And you crushed it in seconds." Ethan lowered his gaze and nodded slowly. "I know, I saw, and I regret it." She noticed his fingers clenched and trembling. A CEO who was used to command stood before her like a boy left outside a closed door. "What are you afraid of, Ethan?" Her tone softened. He lifted his eyes. In the amber light, they looked wet. "I'm afraid of hope. Every time I hope I lose another piece of myself. I lost Anna. I almost lost Sophie. I can't bear to trust again, only to be betrayed by hope itself." Elena went quiet. In his broken words, she heard the echo of her own life. Her father gone, a mother sinking into darkness, a younger brother leaning on her to stand. She too had feared hope. Nothing shatters more easily. She set the glass down, dried her hands, and turned fully to him. "But Sophie is different. She needs you to hope. She needs you to believe. If you let go, who will bring her back to the world?" Ethan held her gaze a long time, as if her words were cutting through the ice around his heart. Then slowly, he bowed his head. "I need your help," he said, hoarse and sincere. "Not only for Sophie, for me." Elena stilled. Her heart trembled. For the first time, The cold CEO wasn't issuing orders. A man was reaching out for rescue. She stood with damp hands resting on the marble. His words hung in the air heavy and delicate, as if a small draft might scatter them. She drew a breath and met his eyes. In the chill brown of his gaze, she saw fractures, those of a proud man, too stubborn to admit pain and too tired to keep hiding it. "Elena," he said again, voice thick. "I don't know what to do anymore. I built an empire with these hands, but I'm helpless with my own child." And today, when she laughed, and then grew afraid, I knew the culprit wasn't anyone else. It was me. A shiver crossed Elena's skin. In his voice, she heard more than regret. She heard something breaking. And beneath it, a plea. She stepped closer, hesitated, then asked, "Do you know why Sophie laughed?" He looked up, as if clutching that thin thread of hope. She went on. "It wasn't because my little show was clever. It was because I was there, truly there with her. No judgment, no anger, just presence. Someone willing to sit on the floor and wait for her to open." Ethan said nothing, but his eyes gleamed. "You don't need to be a great CEO in this house," Elena said quietly. "You need to be a father." His shoulders loosened. His fists unfurled like a weight finally put down. He bowed his head and spoke two simple, honest words. "Thank you." Elena startled faintly. For the first time, the proud man bent to her, not with power, but with unguarded truth. The cold kitchen seemed to grow warm. The wall clock ticked steadily, witness to a moment that was real and not a trick of light. Ethan lifted his eyes again. They shone in the amber glow. "Please help me. Help me learn to trust again and to love my daughter the right way." Elena swallowed. Her throat felt dry, but a gentle smile touched her mouth. She nodded. "All right, but only if you promise something to be patient. Not with me, with Sophie." Ethan nodded slow, certain. The sink stood clean. The water stilled. Quiet settled over the wide kitchen, the light falling over two people facing one another. Elena shifted, leaning a hip against the counter, fingers lacing to steady herself. Ethan remained a few steps away, but the distance no longer cut like ice. A light draft slipped through the window, carrying the damp scent of a stormed-out night. His shirt stirred. His hair fell forward, revealing a weariness she'd never seen. And Elena understood, behind the armor of a powerful CEO was simply a father trying to save his child. They stood like that for a long while. No more words were needed. The silence had changed. It meant agreement. Two people from opposite worlds sharing one fear, one duty. Their eyes met by accident. Elena flinched, but didn't look away. In Ethan's brown gaze, she saw the hurt, and at last, a faint glimmer of trust. In her red-rimmed eyes, he saw courage braided with tenderness, something he himself had lost. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer cold, but light as a promise. "Starting tomorrow, I'll stay in the room when you work with Sophie. Not to interfere, to learn with her." Elena's eyes widened. The vow felt like a bridge spanning a long divide. A tired, true smile rose to her lips. "Then we start over, little by little." He nodded. No rush. They stood in the kitchen's amber glow and let the quiet do its work, mending what had been broken, planting a small seed of hope. Down the hall, Sophie's nightlight still glimmered. She slept curled around her teddy, a thin curve at her mouth, the echo of that first laugh. Elena glanced toward the child's door, then back to Ethan. A whisper moved through her heart. "For her, I won't give up." Ethan, by instinct, looked the same way. And in that moment, without saying it, they both understood a new journey had begun. Chapter 6. The Small Bricks. The playroom glowed in the late afternoon sun. Golden rays streamed through the glass, scattering across the rug, where hundreds of colored blocks lay in cheerful disarray. In the middle sat Sophie Legs, folded her eyes bright in a way they had never been before. Before her rose a castle, half-built squares stacked into towers, arches waiting to be placed, bridges waiting to connect an unfinished kingdom, waiting for her small hands to bring it to life. Elena sat across, watching every move with tender patience. She didn't direct, only whispered a suggestion when Sophie faltered. Beside them, Ethan, for the first time in months, sat on the rug, the air of a commanding CEO set aside. He picked up a block, turning it clumsily in his hand. Those fingers were used to sketches and contracts, not toys. He tried to fit the block in place. It slipped. He tried again. It rolled off and knocked against Sophie's foot. For a moment, frustration surged. He almost set it aside. Then laughter. Sophie burst into giggles, clutching her stomach. Her bright, bubbling laughter rang across the room. Her shoulders shook. Her eyes sparkled as if her father's clumsy mistake were the funniest thing in the world. Ethan froze, stunned by the sound. His chest tightened, then softened. How long had it been since he'd heard his daughter laugh like that? Awkwardly, hesitantly, the corners of his mouth lifted. His first real smile in months, clumsy but genuine. Elena watched from across the rug. She saw a father learning again how to be a father. Awkward, uncertain, but trying. She saw a child laughing, not just because of a toppled block, but because she could feel her father there with her. Elena nudged another block toward Ethan. He looked at her, gratitude flickering, then turned back to Sophie, who was now stacking with fierce concentration, as serious as a tiny architect. It was such a simple scene, yet miraculous. 3 people on the rug blocks scattered around them, laughter mingling with sunlight. For the first time, the cold penthouse no longer felt like a tomb of memories, but a home being rebuilt brick by brick. Ethan let out a breath slower this time, holding back his old impatience. He picked up the block again, looking to Elena as if asking for guidance. She smiled softly. Try turning it sideways and press it close to the wall. It'll hold better. He followed her lead. This time, the block fit snugly, holding firm. Sophie clapped wildly, eyes shining, as if her father had just built a wonder. "You did great," Elena said before she could stop herself. For a heartbeat, she worried he would bristle. But Ethan only let another small, shy smile slip. Sophie giggled so hard, she toppled sideways. Then, for the first time since the accident, she leaned fully against her father's shoulder. Her eyes glowed. Her laughter rang out bright. Ethan went rigid at the touch, his eyes suddenly wet. His large hands trembled as he held another block. Together, they kept building, Sophie crowning the top with tiny bricks, Elena steadying the towers. Ethan clumsy, but more patient than ever. Slowly, the castle rose tall enough to meet Sophie's eyes, proof that fragile things can stand when built together. Sunlight slanted deeper, painting 3 faces, Sophie radiant. Ethan softened Elena, glowing with quiet hope. The castle nearly reached Sophie's height. Towers stretched upward, arches linked both sides, a proud little gate held the center. Sophie touched each piece, as if afraid it might vanish. "Just one more," Elena whispered, handing Ethan a square block. He took it, breath-steady eyes focused as if laying the final stone of a true monument. He set it on top. For a heartbeat, it balanced perfect. Sophie squealed, clapping. Elena beamed. Ethan exhaled in relief, lips quirking into another shy smile. Then crack. A block slipped from below. The whole castle wobbled, tilted, and collapsed in a tumbling clatter. The room fell silent for a beat. Ethan stiffened, instinct rising to scold the failure. But before he could speak, laughter again. Sophie threw herself back, laughing like silver bells. Elena laughed too, covering her mouth. And most unexpected, Ethan laughed. For the first time in more than a year, a laugh unforced, unmasked. Not for a deal, not for appearances, but true. The three of them sat among the ruins of fallen blocks, laughing until their sides ached, as if the toppled castle wasn't a defeat at all, but a triumph. A triumph of presence, of laughter rediscovered. Elena looked across at Ethan. His smile was awkward but real, his eyes lighter, freer. She no longer saw only a cold CEO, but a father relearning joy. Sophie, tired from laughter, leaned into Elena's shoulder, her small hand still clutching her father's. 3 souls, 3 worlds, drawn close until they felt like a family that had always belonged together. The sunset spilled gold across the room, wrapping them in warmth. The wooden castle might have fallen, but something far greater was being built, a home piece by piece, laugh by laugh, touch by touch. Chapter 7. The Storm of Tears. A summer storm battered the city, rain pounding the penthouse windows in sheets of silver. Wind howled between the towers, thunder cracked as if tearing the sky apart. Inside the vast living room, only a few lonely amber lamps glowed, deepening the heavy dark. Elena sat on the long sofa. Sophie pressed tight against her, shivering at each rumble of thunder. She hugged her teddy bear fiercely, but this time she didn't retreat into perfect silence. Instead, her wide gray eyes followed every move Elena made, seeking shelter in her presence. Ethan entered from the hallway. The dim light revealed the hollows of his face, stiff as stone. A glass of wine trembled in his hand, untouched. He stopped at the sight before him, his daughter curled in the nanny's arms, her small face buried in Elena's shoulder. A spark of jealousy flickered, then was drowned by something deeper, heavier pain. Lightning split the sky. Thunder boomed. Sophie startled, curling tighter. Elena held her close, whispering, "It's all right. I'm here." Ethan's defenses cracked. He set the glass down, stepped forward, then sank into the chair across from them. His hands trembled against his knees. "I can't." His voice rasped, broken. "I can't keep going like this." Elena looked up, startled. Rarely did Ethan show emotion, rarer still, to voice weakness. Since the day Anna died, he drew a shuddering breath, shoulders shaking. "Everything inside me died too. I thought I could make it up to Sophie with everything money could buy. But she doesn't need doctors or penthouses or the best the world can offer. She needs me. And I wasn't there." His voice shattered. The cold CEO broke into sobs. Tears spilled onto his hands, hot and searing, ripping memories out of his chest. Gently, Elena laid Sophie on the cushion, then crossed the space. She sat beside Ethan and wrapped her arms around him. A simple embrace, warm and steady, but enough to make him collapse. He leaned into her shoulder, letting the flood come, no longer able to hold it back. Sophie watched, her eyes still wide with fear of thunder. But when she saw her father crying, she froze. Then, like instinct, she set her teddy aside, crawled closer, and nestled into both their arms. And so in the storm's fury, three souls found each other: a broken father, a woman offering comfort, and a trembling child. Rain drummed the glass in time with Ethan's ragged breaths. His face remained buried in Elena's shoulder, his broad frame shaking. Tears soaked into her blouse, but she didn't move. She only held tighter an anchor for a man adrift. That night, Ethan's whisper cracked. Anna called. She said she'd be late. I was in a meeting. I didn't answer. I just texted, "I'll call you when I'm done." That was the last time I ever heard her voice. Elena froze, lips trembling, but she didn't interrupt. The car lost control in the rain. He went on voice, breaking into shards. The crash took everything. They said I was lucky Sophie wasn't with her. But she disappeared anyway. Her soul vanished before my eyes. She sat in silence, her eyes hollow. And I could do nothing. He lifted his head. His eyes, red and swollen, blazed with torment. I tried everything. Doctor's therapy medicine. All worthless. And every time I looked at her, I saw my guilt. If I'd answered the call, if I'd left the office even once, his voice broke. He buried his face in his hands. Anna died because of me. And Sophie, she's dying too. Because of me. Elena reached for his hands, pried his fingers loose, made him look at her. Her eyes brimmed, but her gaze was steady. No, you didn't kill Anna. It was an accident. And Sophie, she's still here, Ethan. She laughed. You heard it. I heard it. Don't let the ghost of that night steal what little hope is left. Ethan trembled, lips parted, but no words coming. In her eyes he saw understanding, born only in those who had lost, who had walked through darkness themselves. Sophie pressed closer, tilting her small face up. Her gray eyes shimmered in the lamp's glow. She said nothing, but laid her tiny hand over his, whispering without words, I still need you. Ethan broke again, clutching her hand, tears streaming. But this time, the tears weren't only despair. They were grief being shared, grief being seen. Elena wrapped them both in her arms, murmuring, You're not alone anymore, Ethan. We'll bring Sophie back together. The storm outside softened rain, easing into gentle drops. Thunder rolling faint in the distance, as if the sky itself knew another storm had already passed inside. On the sofa, Ethan sat in the middle. Sophie rested against his chest, Elena against his shoulder, her arms around them both. No words followed, only breath, only heartbeats, only silence that spoke volumes. Ethan looked down at his daughter, no longer trembling. She nestled into him, eyelids closing, her breathing steady and calm. For the first time in a year, she trusted herself to sleep in her father's arms. A late tear slid onto her hair, this time a tear of release. Elena noticed the twitch at his lips, the faintest smile, fragile, foreign, but true. She leaned against him, saying nothing. Her presence alone reminded him that pain was no longer his burden alone. In that peaceful moment, she saw Sophie's small hand clutching both theirs, even in sleep, unwilling to let go. A simple image, but profound. Three once strangers, bound by one child, by loss, and now by a budding trust. Ethan lifted his gaze to the rain-streaked glass, his voice rough but clear. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're a family. Elena looked up. Their eyes met. No words were needed. What he said was not just for Sophie, but for her too. Outside, the black clouds parted, revealing faint stars. And in the penthouse that had once been a mausoleum of memories, warmth at last stirred the fragile heartbeat of a family whispering of a new beginning. Chapter 8. A New Hope. Seattle greeted them with a veil of mist that draped the sloping streets. The morning air was damp-scented with pine and the faint salt of the sea. Their car pulled up in front of a modest therapy center tucked beneath tall evergreens. No glittering sign, only a simple wooden board engraved Rivera Pediatric Therapy. Elena stepped out first, squeezing Sophie's hand. The little girl hesitated, eyes scanning the swaying pine branches above. This wasn't like the cold hospitals in New York. This place looked more like a home. Through the glass door, warm golden light glowed as if in welcome. Ethan stood beside them, his broad shoulders taut, his face still stern. But in his eyes lingered something new. Not disdain, not anger, but a nervous anticipation, laced with a fragile thread of hope he dared not name. Inside, sunlight spilled across cream-colored walls and soft green carpet. In one corner stood a small rack of instruments, guitar hand drums, a few toy horns. Wooden blocks and bright balls lay neatly arranged on the floor. The room didn't feel like therapy. It felt like a child's art class, a place where play and healing blurred together. A middle-aged man stepped out, his smile, kind, his presence steady. A light blue shirt, trim build, and a voice as warm as a father's. "Hello, I'm Jonathan Rivera." He crouched to Sophie's level. He didn't reach for her, only sat with gentle eyes. "You must be Sophie. Welcome. Here you can do whatever you'd like. No one will make you do anything." Sophie leaned into Elena, anxious. But unlike before, she didn't panic or cry. Her gray eyes flicked toward him for a brief moment, then dropped as she hugged her teddy bear close. Elena bent down and whispered, "This is Dr. Rivera. He's here to help you. Just like when I read you stories, it's only another kind of game." Rivera smiled softly. From his pocket, he drew a small red rubber ball and rolled it lightly across the rug. It stopped at Sophie's shoes. The child glanced down, hesitant. Her hands clutched her bear. Then suddenly, she nudged the ball back with her foot. Rivera's eyes brightened. His smile deepened. He didn't cheer or overpraise. He simply rolled it back as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Behind them, Ethan and Elena held their breath. Their hearts raced with something unfamiliar hope. Ethan's hands clenched, trying to hold back hot tears. Elena pressed her palm to her chest, feeling her heartbeat surge. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a beginning, a first step toward life. The red ball rested between Sophie and Rivera, like a small bridge just laid down. Sophie stared at the floor, tracing her teddy's ear with a finger, but she no longer recoiled. A flicker of curiosity sparked in her eyes as Rivera waited patiently, never pushing. He looked up at the parents and spoke gently. "You know, I don't believe Sophie needs to be fixed. She isn't broken. She doesn't lack anything. What she needs is to be heard, to be given space to express herself in her own way." Ethan frowned, not with anger, but with uncertainty. His voice cracked. "But I've taken her everywhere. The doctors said her body's fine. They said it's trauma. But no one could give me answers." Rivera nodded, calm. "That's right. There's no formula for grieving a mother's loss. What Sophie needs is not commands, not sterile therapy sessions. She needs safety, a place where love is unconditional." Elena's eyes shimmered. His words weren't only for Sophie. They touched the wounds in her own heart, the child she once was. Sophie already responded. When I met her at eye level, Rivera added. That means she hasn't lost her connection to the world. She's just too afraid to step out. But I believe with patience, she will return. Ethan's shoulders loosened. His large hand dropped gently onto Sophie's shoulder. She startled slightly, but didn't pull away. His eyes blurred with tears. He looked at Rivera, then at Elena, as if daring to believe his daughter wasn't lost forever. Rivera handed Sophie a small hand drum, then sat cross-legged on the floor, tapping a slow rhythm. Sophie looked from the drum to her teddy. Her small hand reached out, tapped once thump. Simple, clumsy, yet to Ethan and Elena it was nothing less than a song of hope. Elena covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Ethan for the first time smiled openly. The steady beat of the drum mingled with the soft patter of drizzle outside. Sophie struck one beat, then stopped, sneaking a glance at Rivera. He only smiled and tapped again. Elena held her breath. Ethan's hands gripped the chair. Then a miracle in miniature. Sophie struck twice her shoulders, trembling at her own boldness. Rivera's voice was warm, affirming beautiful Sophie. You see, sound can be the language of the heart. Elena's tears spilled. Ethan's chest swelled with awe, sorrow, and joy tangled together. For a moment, Sophie was no longer a shadow locked in silence, but a sapling stretching toward the light. When the session ended, Sophie hugged her bear again. But instead of hiding behind it, she turned toward Rivera. Her eyes, tentative yet softer, held recognition, silent thanks. Ethan stepped forward and shook Rivera's hand. The grip of a man used to command was now desperate, almost clinging. His voice broke. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't. Rivera shook his head kindly. Don't thank me. Sophie is the brave one, and you, Ethan, you must learn to be beside her in the way she needs, not the way you imagine. Elena stood nearby, her eyes bright, her heart swelling with a new kind of faith. When they stepped outside, the Seattle sky had cleared. Raindrops lingered on the pines, catching the pale afternoon light. Sophie walked slowly between them, her small hand in Elena's, then reached across for her father's. Ethan stiffened, then gently closed his hand around hers. 3 hands linked beneath the tall green canopy. No words were spoken, but in each heart a seed of hope had taken root. Elena looked up at Ethan. In his eyes, once glacial, there was now a softened glow, faint but undeniable. He nodded to her a silent vow. We'll walk this road together. From the distance, a bird's call echoed through the damp forest air, like a song announcing a new beginning. Chapter 9. The Miracle Step. Golden afternoon light bathed the Seattle park. The last rays of the day spilled across a carpet of emerald grass, jeweled with raindrops left behind from the morning shower. Children's laughter drifted from afar, mingling with birdsong, painting the scene in tenderness. Elena spread a thin blanket on the grass, setting Sophie's familiar teddy beside her. The little girl sat down, eyes wide, clutching the toy, as if it were a charm against the world. Ethan knelt close, gaze never leaving his daughter. A few paces away, Dr. Rivera gave a gentle nod to both parents, a signal it was time. Elena leaned forward, her voice soft as breath. Sophie, today we'll try something new. Just one step. No one will force you. Your father and I will be right here. Sophie's gray eyes wavered. She looked at her teddy, then at Elena, then at Ethan. His face was solemn, but his eyes, fragile, trembling, held the weight of a promise. Ethan slowly extended his hand, palm open. Elena did the same, her eyes shimmering. Two hands reached toward Sophie, like twin lanterns in the dusk. She hesitated. Her small legs trembled, knees pressing together. The air seemed to still the park, holding its breath. Then Sophie leaned forward. One tiny foot touched the grass, shaky, unsteady. And one step. Elena's mouth parted, her hand shaking. Ethan froze, chest locked. Sophie's eyes brightened, faint but real. And then another step. A smile broke across her face. Not yet full, but radiant as sunset. Elena burst into tears, laughter tangled with sobs. Ethan, the man of stone, stood red-eyed, his hand trembling closer. Sophie glanced at them both, then let her teddy fall to the ground. She stumbled forward, clumsy, trembling, but truly moving, and collapsed into their open arms. All three tumbled onto the grass. Sophie's laughter rang out pure and high, breaking the silence that had held her for a year. Ethan held his daughter tight, burying his face in her soft hair. A sob shaking loose from his chest. Elena wrapped her arms around them, both tears streaming, her smile brighter than the sun. The miracle had come. Not in a clinic, not at the hands of doctors, but here in a sunlit park where a child found her feet and a family found its heart. Sophie's laughter carried under the trees a song long forgotten, now reborn. They lay tangled on the grass, unbothered by blades in their hair and on their clothes, lost in joy. From a distance, Rivera stood with arms crossed, a smile, warm and knowing. His eyes held no surprise, only quiet confirmation the child was ready. Stepping closer, he said gently, "You see, Sophie never lost her legs. What she needed was a reason to use them, and today she chose to walk towards you both." Ethan looked up, eyes raw, voice breaking. "You're right. She chose. And she didn't choose me alone. She chose Elena too." Elena startled, her heart racing. But when her eyes met Ethan's, she saw no coldness, no disdain. Only gratitude, respect, and a new light, the light of a man relearning love. Sophie clung to both of them, tiny hands gripping their clothes. Her legs still trembled, but her body shook with joy, not fear. Ethan pressed his lips to her hair and whispered, "I'm here now, Sophie. I won't leave you again." Elena stayed silent, tears streaming, her faith rising. The miracle wasn't just Sophie's steps. It was those words from a man who had once locked his heart away. Rivera lingered only a moment longer, then stepped back, leaving space for the family to breathe. He knew their journey was far from over, but the turning point had come. And the greatest miracle was this: Sophie herself had chosen to open the door. Seattle's twilight fell, pouring honeyed light over the grass. Tall pines swayed their branches, jeweled with the last drops of rain. In the distance, kites danced, children's voices rising in the breeze. On the blanket, the three sat close. Sophie clutched her teddy again, but her legs stretched forward, toes brushing the grass, as if declaring, "I can stand again." Elena brushed away the sweat and tears still clinging to Sophie's cheek. The little girl giggled, tilting into her chest. Ethan, on the other side, stroked her hair, his eyes brimming with an emotion beyond words, gratitude so deep it ached. He turned to Elena, voice raw but true. "Thank you. Without you, I would never have heard her laugh again, and I would never have believed she could walk." Elena shook her head, smiling through tears. "It wasn't me, Ethan. It was Sophie. She chose to live again. We were only there when she needed us." Ethan bowed his head, lips curving faintly. He reached across, his hand closing over hers, where it lay on the grass. A small squeeze, warm and steady. Elena froze, then gently squeezed back. Sophie looked at them, giggled, and placed her tiny hand atop theirs. 3 hands stacked in silent covenant under the fading sun. No words followed. Only the hush of wind through the trees, the rush of hearts, and Sophie's soft laughter, the sound that had given life back to them all. The last light slipped behind the distant mountains, leaving the sky a gentle violet. And in that moment, Elena understood the true miracle wasn't just a child's step. It was 3 broken hearts finding one another and choosing to walk forward together into the future. Chapter 10. The House of Lavender. A summer afternoon bathed the countryside in soft gold. A narrow tree-lined path led to a simple white-roofed house, its porch draped in climbing vines of violet bloom. Around it, endless lavender fields rippled in the wind, their fragrance gentle and sweet in the air. Sophie ran freely through the purple sea, her little legs now steady, her white dress fluttering like wings. Her laughter carried over the hum of bees, a melody announcing a new chapter of life. Elena stood on the porch, hesitant, her eyes drinking in the scene. Too beautiful, too peaceful, so different from the cold penthouses, from the cramped apartment she once called home. This house felt like a dream. Ethan approached, holding a small velvet box. He wore only a simple shirt, no sharp suit, no armor of a CEO. His eyes held hers steady but trembling. "Elena," he said, voice low and warm. "This house, I didn't buy it just for Sophie. I bought it for you too." Elena turned eyes wide. Ethan drew a breath, then knelt among the lavender blossoms, swaying as witnesses. He opened the box, revealing a silver ring, a small diamond catching the sunlight. "When I was lost, you were there. You gave my daughter her laughter back. You gave me a heart that could love again. Elena Carter, will you be Sophie's mother and the woman I want beside me for the rest of my life?" Her breath caught. Tears brimmed, blurring every memory of exhaustion, scorn, and silent grief. Now here she was, standing in a lavender field before the man who had once been so cold. Sophie ran over radiant, holding a sprig of lavender. She looked at her father on one knee, then handed the flower to Elena, a child's innocent blessing. Elena knelt, embracing Sophie first, kissing her forehead. Then she lifted her gaze to Ethan, smiling through tears. "I've been all those things for a long time already, Ethan," she whispered. "And today, I'll add one more word, yes." Ethan exhaled, his eyes wet, as he slid the ring onto her finger. Sophie clapped, laughing, then wrapped her small arms around them both. In the lavender fields, under waves of fragrance, a family was bound together, not by contracts or wealth, but by love and the patience that had carried them through the storm. They rose together. Evening light spilled across the fields, gilding 3 silhouettes against the sky. Ethan extended his hand. Sophie caught it at once. Elena followed. They walked the stone path around the house, passing small rose beds and pots of green herbs. Elena brushed a mint leaf, its cool scent rising to her fingertips, and laughed softly. "We'll have our own garden," Ethan said, with quiet certainty. "Here Sophie can run fall in the grass without fear. You can plant flowers or anything you want." Elena turned to him, her heart swelling. A vision of her mother and brother in their dark, crowded flat flickered through her mind. But here was sunlight, Sophie's laughter, and the promise of happiness, not mere survival. Sophie darted ahead, arms spread, white dress fluttering like a butterfly. She plucked a lavender stem and held it up to her father. Ethan knelt to take it, smiling, with rare peace, unguarded, almost boyish. Elena's chest tightened at the sight. A man once frozen in grief, now bent to receive a flower from his child, his eyes alight with rebirth. They toured the kitchen, sunlight spilling through open windows, the scent of wood still fresh on the chairs. Ethan placed his hand on the table and murmured, "See, it doesn't need to be a penthouse. This is home. This is where Sophie will grow safe and free." Elena said nothing. Her tears said it for her. Sophie climbed onto a chair, clutching her bear, chirping, "Our new house." The child's simple words christened the home, blessing it as their true haven. Twilight stretched purple across the lavender fields, the sky streaked with gold and red fading into violet dusk. On the porch, they sat together, Ethan leaning back, Sophie curled in his lap, Elena close beside him. On her finger, the ring glimmered in the dying light. Sophie began to hum a tune she had learned in therapy. Her small voice wavered off key, but pure and warm. Ethan and Elena froze, overcome. After a year of silence, this simple song felt like the holiest of miracles. Ethan tightened his arms around his daughter. His eyes glistened, but his smile was steady. He turned to Elena and whispered, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know this: so long as I have you and Sophie, I'll never fear another storm." Elena wept softly, but they were tears of joy. She laid her hand over his, her voice trembling but sure. "We've walked through the darkness, Ethan. From now on, only light." Sophie stopped her humming and giggled, laying her tiny hand over theirs. 3 hands stacked a child's innocent vow, binding them tighter than words. The lavender suede stars began to bloom in the deepening sky. And in the little white house, there was no silence, no loneliness, only 3 hearts healed and bound. A family reborn from loss. A love blossomed from wounds. And a promise silent, but eternal, to love, to guard, to walk together always.